The National Commission on Human Rights is currently giving an update on the current state of human rights in Kenya. This is happening at the KNCHR offices along Lenana Road. Let's listen into the proceedings.
State of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the country. Your Excellency, the State of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms statement by the Commission comes ahead of your 5th State of the Nation address. It is part of our deliberate efforts within our mandate to increase and create awareness on human rights status in Kenya while endeavoring to hold the government accountable in the promotion and protection of human rights in the country. Your Excellency, the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights issues this statement in the spirit and letter of the national values and principles of government that are spelled out under Article 10 of the Constitution of Kenya. And these are patriotism, national unity, sharing and devolution of power, rule of law, democracy, participation of people, human dignity, equity, social justice, inclusiveness, equality, human rights, non-discrimination, and protection of the marginalized, good governance, integrity, transparency, and accountability, and sustainable development. Further, Sessional Paper 3 of 2014 and the National Human Rights Policy and Action Plan equally guide ministries, departments, and agencies, key semi-autonomous government agencies, and public agencies to promote a culture of human rights in our country. As a national commission, we wish to commend the state for ratifying key human rights treaties and conventions which imposed upon Kenya the obligation to respect, protect, fulfill, and promote human rights for all. The treaties also create reporting obligations on Kenya and with respect to steps taken to implement the provision of the various regional and international instruments. The National Commission continues to support the Office of the Attorney General and the Department of Justice towards timely state reporting in line with its commitments under the various international bodies. The National Commission keeps track on the implementation of recommendations of these treaty bodies. On this score, our Commission lauds the state for submission of reports to the treaty body monitoring mechanisms and encourages the state to do so for the few outstanding ones, such as International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention Against Torture, the Africa Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, as well as the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, on the rights of women in Africa, popularly referred to as the Maputo Protocol. The National Commission notes with concern that while Kenya has largely complied with its reporting obligations internationally, the state continues to lag behind in reporting under the African human rights system. Your Excellency, Kenya has ratified key regional instruments including the Africa Charter on Human and People's Rights, the Banjul Charter, the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, the Maputo Protocol, the Protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the establishment of an African Court on Human and People's Rights. However, Kenya has not made a declaration under Article 34(6) of the protocol, and thus it does not accept the jurisdiction of the court, African Court, to receive complaints from individuals and NGOs on rights violations. Your Excellency, Kenya is yet to ratify several treaties and optional protocols. Specifically, the National Commission calls for Kenya to ratify the following treaties with regards to human rights. 1. The African Union Convention for the Protection and Assistance of Internally Displaced Persons in Africa, the Kampala Convention. The African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. 3. The Protocol on the Statute of the African Court of Justice and Human Rights. 4. the International Convention on the Protection of the Rights of All Migrant Workers and Members of their Families, the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, the optional protocols to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the optional protocol to the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman and Degrading Treatment and Punishment, popularly referred to as the OPCAT, the optional protocol to the Convention on the Rights of the Persons with Disabilities, and the optional protocol to the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Your Excellency, the National Commission wishes to address you on the current status of civil and political rights in Kenya. On the political rights front, Kenyan eligible voters participated in the general elections on 8th August 2017, the second under the country's 2010 constitution. The general election was indicted by the Supreme Court of Kenya in its ruling of 1st September 2017, and that led to the subsequent repeat presidential election held on 26 October 2017, culminating in your swearing in as the President of the Republic of Kenya on 28th November 2017. Since then, Your Excellency, there has been a spate of events leading to violation of rights and fundamental freedoms and threatened violations of others. The National Commission has been particularly concerned about the hardline stances by contenders of political divides that threw the country into political and economic uncertainty. The forced disenfranchisement of a section of Kenyan voters and the intimidation of poll officials in the repeat presidential election of 26 October 2017 was a cause of great concern to Kenyans. The National Commission also calls upon the government to lift its reservation on Article 14.2c of the Maputo Protocol, which states that state parties shall take all appropriate measures to protect the reproductive rights of women by authorizing medical abortion in cases of sexual assault, rape, incest, and where the continued pregnancy endangers the mental and physical health of the mother or the life of the mother or the fetus. In view of the above statistics, the Commission calls upon the government to ratify the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance. The National Commission on several occasions condemned the extrajudicial killings and injuries to persons and has called for accountability on officers involved. The National Commission also investigated the police brutality meted on University of Nairobi students during protests. The anti-riot police officers entered the university, specifically Department of Architecture, Design and Development, ADD, and indiscriminately unleashed tear gas and terror on students in the guise of quelling the university protests. Many students were seriously injured or hurt. This was the second time in a row that students were being violated. Your Excellency, the National Commission submitted its 2017 elections report to the bicameral Houses of Parliament and Senate. This report is yet to be tabled for debate in the two legislative houses, and the Commission calls for its speedy deliberation. The National Commission notes with appreciation that the Parliament and Senate have committed in writing to deliberate on our report. Your Excellency, at this juncture, the National Commission notes with utmost appreciation the magnanimous gesture of your meeting with the opposition leader, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, on Friday, 9th March 2018. Your meeting at Harambee House was a true show of unity and progressive leadership that we hope will ensure national dialogue and healing takes root following the pre- and post-general election events. We urge you, Your Excellency, and the Right Honorable Raila Odinga to remain true and firm to this newfound commitment, which will enhance our national values and principles of governance as enshrined in Article 10 of the Constitution of Kenya, and play your leadership role as envisaged in under Article 131E, especially as a symbol of national unity. Your Excellency, freedom of assembly, demonstration, picketing, and petition is protected under the Constitution of Kenya. It is in the public domain that there were several demonstrations in the run-up to the 2017 general elections and after. The protests were met with excessive force by law enforcement agents who indiscriminately used tear gas and water cannons to disperse crowds. The National Commission also expresses concern that the rising cases of wanton destruction of property by civilians during the same period. We call upon Kenyans everywhere to exercise their rights within the prescribed confines of the law. Your Excellency, based on the preliminary findings of our commission regarding the loss of property, we call upon the state to set up an independent mechanism to audit the losses incurred by various business ventures during the electioneering period and subsequently recommend the requisite compensation and accountability. This should be done in all counties that recorded violence. Your Excellency, the freedom of association and civic space plays a pivotal role in shaping the human rights culture in our country in ensuring government compliance with human rights obligations. In the recent past, however, there has been an uneasy tension between the government and civil society organizations. Your Excellency, members of the civil society organizations, community leaders, paralegals, social workers, media practitioners, volunteer lawyers, human rights defenders are central in advancing the rights of the vulnerable in our midst and advancing democratization processes in our region. The threatened arbitrary deregistration of some human rights organizations, as well as the delayed operationalization of the Public Benefits Organization Act, are examples of the turbulence that NGOs have waded through. The National Commission calls for the Public Benefits Organization Act to be operationalized as a matter of priority, Your Excellency. Article 1 of the Constitution is very clear that the sovereign power belongs to the people of Kenya. The role and place of civil society institutions under the Public Organizations Benefit Act is very clear, and the rule of law must be respected by all. Your Excellency, extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances have been a common occurrence in our country. The National Commission strongly recommends the implementation of the Prevention of Torture Act and the National Coroners Act of 2017. The Independent Policing and Oversight Authority and the National Police Service must thoroughly investigate extrajudicial killings and enforced disappearances, and those found culpable brought to book. The National Commission also strongly urges the state to ratify the Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearances, and also to employ and establish the National and County Coroners Bill accordingly. Your Excellency, Article 131E, 2E of the Constitution gives you authority as the head of state and government to ensure the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms and the rule of law. We therefore call upon you, Your Excellency, to direct the security forces to forthwith end enforced disappearances, torture, extrajudicial killings, and arbitrary arrests. This will ensure that all security agencies operate within the rule of law, according to the National Security Guiding Principles under Article 238B of the Constitution of Kenya. Your Excellency, Kenya is yet to establish the death penalty in line with calls by the regional mechanisms, as well as the UN Committee on International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. The National Commission welcomes the move by the government through the Office of the Attorney General to set up a task force that has been mandated to effect the Supreme Court ruling of December 2017 that declared the mandatory nature of the death penalty as pertains to murder unconstitutional. The National Commission is a member of this task force and shall continue to engage key stakeholders and the public at large on the international trends with regard to the death penalty and call for its absolute abolition. We call upon the Power of Mercy Committee to release its report on the survey conducted on Kenyans' perception to the abolition of the death penalty. Your Excellency, Article 33 of the Constitution guarantees freedom of expression. The National Commission has been concerned that this freedom has often been abused by politicians to advance political ambitions and stir divisions with dangerous political rhetoric among the Kenyan people. Moreover, attempts to regulate the media, especially the new age media, has in some instances opened an avenue to harassment and victimization of Kenyans. Further, the National Commission holds that the media switch off for 3 days of the three television broadcasting stations earlier this year was an affront to Article 34 of the Constitution of Kenya, which guarantees freedom and independence of electronic, print, and all other types of media. The National Commission would like to re-emphasize that journalists and the media as a whole have a duty to inform the public, and the public has a right to receive information. As such, members of the fourth estate require an enabling and secure environment to optimize their enjoyment of their rights and freedoms in the course of their duties. This environment should and can only be provided by the state as the principal duty bearer. The freedom exercised by media is clearly stipulated in Article 21, Article 33, and Article 34, 35, and 36 of the Constitution, and other statutory provisions. Your Excellency, access to justice is a key constitutional right for all Kenyans. The National Commission welcomes the enactment of key legislation to the protection of human rights, such as the Legal Aid Act, the Victim Protection Act, the Witness Protection Act, Prevention of Torture Act, Small Claims Court Act, and Persons Deprived of Liberty Act. The full benefits intended under these statutes is, however, yet to be felt. Full operationalization and resourcing of these statutes and relevant regulations, however, remains a challenge. The National Commission strongly recommends that the laws enacted translate to intended tangible benefits on the common citizen, especially among those who have been historically marginalized. Your Excellency, Article 43 of the Constitution of Kenya guarantees the right to the highest attainable standard of health, accessible and adequate housing, reasonable standards of sanitation, to be free from hunger, to clean and safe water in adequate quantities, social security and education.